In recent years, archaeologists around Britain have been studying the fascinating traces of our past that are discovered at low tide.
So it's actually built up against the cliff face.
From lost harbours and ancient cave art
Goodness gracious.
to forgotten industries and unexplained shipwrecks. These intertidal remains can help us understand our island's history and reveal how it's been shaped by our enduring relationship with the sea. Every year, coastal erosion allows us to see more and more. But it's all under threat from the relentless onslaught of waves and weather. We want to investigate this vital evidence before it's gone for good. So we're travelling all over Britain to see what we can discover when the tide is out. Joining me are my colleagues from CITiZAN, the Coastal and Intertidal Zone Archaeological Network. Together, we'll explore the amazing stories to be found in the intertidal zone.
In West Weems.
Right. This week, we're in the north of England, on the Yorkshire coast. We'll discover what happened one night when a fishing trawler went wildly off course in the North Sea.
The waves were picking this 70-odd foot boat up and just throwing it about.
We'll try to make sense of the monumental remains of a First World War gun battery.
Where are we? Where are we in the fort? What is this?
And we'll investigate a forgotten coastal industry whose success depended on, amongst other things,
Urine.
the stretch of coast we're exploring is in the counties of East and North Yorkshire. It's a coastline of long, sandy beaches, rugged cliffs and bustling ports. Yet this is also one of the most vulnerable coastlines in Europe. Each year, up to 3.5 metres of land are lost to the sea. This leaves some of the coastal roads torn apart and unusable.
It would have been continuous out there, I guess, like that.
For archaeologists, it's a challenge to track down all the historical evidence in the time available. And that's what's brought us to Saltick Bay near Whitby. For centuries, the plentiful waters off the Yorkshire coast have sustained a thriving fishing industry. But fishing the North Sea brings risks as well as rewards.
Crikey.
This is a mess, isn't it?
What is it? A boat?
Yes, this is presumably the engine. That looks like the propeller shaft, so that would be the back end of the vessel, the stern. That would be in the middle of the vessel, so we've lost the entire starboard side. That's been just sheared off.
That's a big engine.
It's a big engine.
So quite a big boat. I mean, what kind of... Do we know anything about it at all?
We do know a little bit, yeah. This is the wreck of the Admiral Van Tromp, which wrecked in 1976. But there's a bit of mystery about how and why it wrecked here.
If it's 1976, what's the mystery?
Well, there's not really ever been any explanation as to how it ended up so far off course. It was actually headed out way into the North Sea on a fishing trip, but ended up wrecking here at Whitby. It left from Scarborough, ended up wrecking way off course.
Yeah, I don't imagine that it wrecked here. I feel like, because this is, I mean, to have come in this far seems pretty unlikely. It's really shallow around here. So I'd be surprised if this was where it ran aground. It's all broken up. I wonder if it actually wrecked out there and somehow has ended up here.
Where it wrecked is the mystery, and why it wrecked where it did.
We don't know why it wrecked.
Well, do we?
We don't know, but it's 1976. It's not that long ago.
So, 76, the mystery of the wreck.
Why is it here?
Why is it here? I mean, yeah, they've got...
What exactly happened on board the Van Tromp that day in 1976? How did it end up so close to the shore? And did the boat's crew survive? We'll try to track down answers a little later. But first, we're turning our attention southwards, towards the village of Kilnsea, near the mouth of the Humber estuary. During World War I, the port of Hull was critical not only because it built warships, but also because it provided thousands of men and boats to counter U-boat attacks. Its strategic significance prompted the building of gun batteries and forts. It became the best defended port in England. Some of the defences have gone, others are ruins, but none of them was more impressive than Fort Godwin. These defences were extremely well planned and designed on an enormous scale.
What we're trying to do is get people to help.
While the tide's still out, Oliver has joined Chris Kalonko, an archaeologist who helps local communities identify World War I remains.
Now, Chris, we've got a huge jumble of massive bits of concrete, but I mean, where are we? Where are we in the fort? What is this?
Well, this is actually the remains of one of the magazines. These coastal artillery batteries fired massive shells out to sea, about 10-15 miles out that way, and they needed somewhere to store the ammunition. To do that, they constructed these massive magazines of concrete, and this would have been well underground as well to, again, contain an explosion if anything did go wrong.
So we've got the shells underground. How are they getting them out?
Oh, that's a very good question. These shells weighed about 380 pounds. So to take them from the magazine down below to the gun crew up above, you had a lift. This was powered by hydraulics, which were quite a revolutionary technology at the time, and would have allowed the crews to take the shells and send them safely up to the crew above waiting to operate the gun.
Fort Godwin once stood on the cliff top, but that's since been undermined by the sea, causing the various parts of the battery to collapse onto the beach.
Right, now, this is starting to make a bit more sense to me about what I might be looking at. This looks more like a gun emplacement.
And it's exactly that, yeah. This is a serious piece of concrete. So here at the front, we have where the gun would have been mounted.
OK, so we've got all these, what they look like, stabilising pins, I guess, to me.
Yeah,
is that what we're looking at?
Massive threaded bolts, which we used to attach the gun mount itself. So the gun itself sat about 3 metres above our heads. It wasn't mounted directly onto this plate. And this entire thing would have had to have been completely level. If the gun wasn't level, it wouldn't fire correctly, and the ranges would be completely off. So there'd have been a lot of effort going to actually making sure this thing was completely flat.
I mean, it just goes to show that the scale of this thing, the amount of concrete, I mean, it's not safe from coastal erosion. It's been undermined and it's been destroyed by the sea.
And this thing's reinforced concrete as well. It's not just plain concrete, and even that doesn't save it from coastal erosion.
The scale of this battery reflects the British fear that German Zeppelins would try to bomb Hull. So what did Godwin look like before it started to fall into the sea?
Right, well this is a 1915 plan.
Simon Davis is a local resident who has been digging into the archives to find out.
OK.
And these are the emplacements. And if you look behind us, you know, the concrete edge you can see along the top. That's that back edge there.
It's a huge amount.
A huge amount
has gone.
Yep. Now, what this is, which we can't see anymore because, of course, it's all gone, this was the surrounding defences of the fort. So, basically, it was a big ditch filled with barbed wire, so if anybody did attack, then they had infantrymen who could actually shoot at them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? There we are, Godwin Battery.
It's an incredible structure, and it really is a beautiful plan.
It's gorgeous.
By 1916, Fort Godwin was fully operational and home to 1,000 soldiers. So, how did their arrival here change the life of the hamlet of Kilnsey, its tiny, isolated neighbour? We'll return to this story later. Back at Saltic Bay, the tide's still going out, and Gus and I are investigating the other intriguing remains on this shoreline.
There is.
What strikes me about the archaeology we're discovering is that it reveals just how industrial coastlines were in the past. In fact, some of this country's best initiatives started on the coast. This part of North Yorkshire was famous for the manufacture of alum, a colourless salt once used in the textile industry.
Let's ask Chris.
Archaeologist Chris Scott has excavated what's left of an alum house, the centre of the alum production process. So what exactly is alum, and why was it so important to produce it here?
Alum is the salt that is the end product of this process, where we're quarrying shale from gouging the shale out of the cliffs here, processing that shale and turning it into something useful, something that can be used in the wool and the cloth industry.
If you want to export wool and cloth, it needs to be dyed with a fixative that stops the dye running. And that fixative is called alum. Now, in 1534, we had a Brexit moment when King Henry VIII declared himself head of the English Church. Now, the Pope in Rome had in his papal estates one of the biggest alum mines in Europe, and we used to get our alum from there, but the Pope refused to sell us any, so we had to find our own source of alum.
Yeah, so that presumably then required a whole lot of extra processing.
That's right, and
buildings like this.
That's what the alum house was for. It was the first chemical factory in this country.
I can see some really lovely stone up there and then slightly less lovely below. What section of the house are we looking at?
The really poor quality stonework below, I think, is the foundation, and above that you've got these lovely herringbone tool blocks. So we've lost a huge portion of this building. We're just left with this remnant that we can see, and from that we've got to interpret what was going on here.
The quality of the shale in this region enabled North Yorkshire to become Britain's principal alum producer. It was crucial to the manufacture of the country's textiles, Britain's biggest export. Dozens of small alum works set up around here, hoping to make a fortune. Having shown us the alum house, Chris is keen for us to see the other intertidal evidence he's found on this site.
Here's our harbour. This is the wall of the harbour. You can see here the bottom course of stonework, another course above it, and each course has this groove cut into it.
I can see, there's a lip here, and along here. Oh, yeah, and down there too.
And also, if you look here, you've got an edge too, which runs
oh, yeah, that's another
through
lip.
here, through there. Can you see that lip there? And here's the corner.
That's the extent of it.
So this is all in place?
Yep, all these are in situ.
enormous.
And then you have the same thing going off here.
Yeah.
So this is the other side of the structure. You're on one side, I'm on the other side.
These massive harbour walls protected the alum works from the often violent sea. The harbour allowed coal to arrive by boat, and for the finished alum to be shipped out to textile manufacturers all over the country. And beyond the harbour, the archaeological evidence continues. This is a loading ramp. The deep ruts in its surface tell us that carts would have been routinely travelling up and down it. The remains we have here are all evidence that some big industrial activity was going on here just as the Industrial Revolution was beginning. So what more can we find out about these alum works? And they may have been big, but was this place a success? We'll return later. We're exploring the archaeology on Yorkshire's coastline. There are extensive remains here of the region's industrial past, but they're all in danger of being consumed by the sea. This is the great port city of Hull. In the 19th century, Hull was one of the country's leading shipbuilding centres. Vessels built here ended up all over the world. Today, most of that old industry has vanished, but there are traces that emerge on a low tide. At the old Victoria Dock on the River Humber, just outside the city centre, I'm meeting Megan Clement, one of CITiZAN's archaeologists for the north of England.
Interesting place.
Yeah. Where we are now was the site of Earl's Shipyard.
Earl's Shipyard?
Yes.
Owned by the Earls, presumably?
Yeah, so this was set up by two brothers, Charles and William. So what we've got here, what we're stood on right now, this is what we call slipway number 1. And this is what they would have used to launch ships into the river and pull them up.
When you say this, do you mean like these timber bits?
Yeah, so these wooden timbers.
Well, you can see it stretching all the way down, actually, can't you?
Yeah, there's about, in this slipway, we've counted 40 timbers.
It's huge. You say it's slipway number 1, so there are more of them.
Yes, there's a second slipway, a bit further that direction. And we know this because we've seen it on aerial photographs and on plans of the shipyard.
So this wasn't like some kind of cottage industry at all. This, the old shipyard was big business.
Yeah, it was huge. And in the time they were running, they built 700 ships.
700 ships?
Yeah.
I mean, when was that?
That was between 1845 and 1932 when they closed.
So that's nearly 100 years. That's a really good innings.
Yeah, it's really, really good.
Believe it or not, this massive shipyard stood on this exact spot. By the 1870s, Earls was employing up to 3,000 men and building ships for the Japanese and Russian navies. Nothing of it remains apart from the slipways. These 19th century hulks are unconnected to the shipyard, and CITiZAN volunteers are recording them simply because they'll be gone soon. However, historian Rob Robinson has interesting tales to tell about some of the ships that were built here.
Earls Shipyard were leaders in the development of modern technology. In the 19th century, we went from wooden sailing ships to, by the end of the century, steel-built steamships. But of course, we've got to remember that in those days, the sea was it was our first World Wide Web. People and ships from Britain travelled all over the world, and the steamship was the thing that you travelled in for a large amount of that period.
Just imagining all these ships are setting off from here and they're heading off on all of these global adventures.
Yeah, you'll find the sort of remains of these ships scattered across the world, really.
I mean, where did they end up?
All over the place. But the most remarkable story, I suppose, of any ships from here were the ships called the Inca and the Atlanta. Now, they were assembled on the edge of this river, one in the early 1900s, the other in the early 1930s. But they were pin-built. That means they weren't actually put together properly. All the parts were marked, and then they were packed away in packing cases. And they were shipped overseas, and they ended up on the coast of South America, on the Pacific coast. And they were carried by rail, then, the boxes, up to Lake Titicaca. And Lake Titicaca is the highest navigable waterway in the world. It's 120 miles long, about 22 miles wide, but it's 12,500 feet up in the Andes. But it needed steamships.
So it's built here, deconstructed, flat-packed, sent across the ocean, taken up a mountain and put back together.
That's it in a nutshell. And those two ships bore testimony to the skills that went into them because they lasted for a very long time. The Inca lasted into the 1990s. The Atlanta's still around, not working at the moment, but it's still there. And what a testimony when you think how long ago these ships were built.
The Atlanta began to sail across Lake Titicaca just as Earl's Shipyard was beginning to run into trouble on the banks of the Humber. No one could have imagined a better legacy. The Atlanta was still at work on the lake in the early 2000s. Closer to home, we're continuing our investigation into the wrecking of the Admiral Van Tromp. Over in Whitby Harbour, Oliver is heading out to sea on a similar lifeboat to the one that came to the rescue at 3:26 a.m. on the 30th of September 1976. Two men who remember that night are Peter Thompson, who was second coxswain on the offshore lifeboat, and Fred Normandale, who was also out that night, fishing from his boat, Courage. This is the actual rock where the boat foundered, Black Nab. So Charlotte was right, that it was wrecked further out to sea.
Apparently the skipper says
Fred was first to respond to the Van Tromp's distress signal. There were 5 fishermen still alive and fighting for survival.
Fred, you heard the Mayday call and you were the first on the scene. What happened when you got here?
because it was a northeasterly wind, that swell was building as the water shallowed. And so by the time the waves were getting onto the shore, it was 8 or 10 foot swell turning over, breaking, which was a pretty hazardous place to go into.
With shallow water, the problem is getting in to a boat to effect a rescue. The only way you can do this is to turn the boat around, drop an anchor. Unfortunately, as we attempted to get in, we lost the anchor, that broke, which meant we were hitting the rocks underneath here ourselves. When we veered in again, we looked as though we were going to get somewhere near, but unfortunately we started hitting the bottom again, and then we still looking to see if there's anything more we could do when we got hit by a wave from over the stern. So once that wave had gone over the top of us, it was a question of we couldn't help anymore.
At 4:15 a.m, the Van Tromp had radioed to say that the situation was critical and they planned to abandon the boat. At least some of the crew were now in the water. The Coast Guard decided it was time to launch a second rescue attempt.
The Coast Guards immediately launched the inshore lifeboat, and because we heard from the Coast Guards that one man was clinging to black nab there, he was on the other side of it, but he managed to swim to it and he was clinging on, and the inshore lifeboat quite miraculously managed to get in and pick him off before it was too late.
The man saved from black nab was the skipper, Frank Tarl. The other four crew, Alan Marston, George Eves, John Addison and a teenager, Tony Nicholson, they were unaccounted for. So what happened to them once the rescue boats could no longer help? We'll return to this story later. Back in Whitby, Charlotte is familiarising herself with one of this town's most popular products, jet jewellery. Today, the streets are just full of shops selling it. But for its heyday, we have to go back to the Victorian era, when Whitby was the jet centre of the world. Up the coast from Whitby is a place called Sand's End. Jet has always been rare and dangerous to extract. Charlotte is joining archaeologist John Buglas to locate some of the old shafts where jet was once mined.
So, John, what are we looking at here?
Well, this is the base of the jet shale bed. See, there's a square cut, and then there's another one there, one round the corner, and there's another couple on the end.
Yeah.
They're the backs of the mines that were driven in to chase the elusive jet.
And it is quite dicey. I mean, since we've been standing, we can't really get too close, because since we've been standing here, there have been bits dropping off the cliff.
There's constantly, there's a constant fall of cliff all the way along here, because it's very, very soft, it's very unconsolidated stuff.
Have you got some jet in your bag?
We've got some samples in here. Now that's more or less as it's found.
It really does look like shale, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Really...
on the other side, on this side, that is fragments of the shale still adhering to it from where it's been compressed. There's the jet in there, and this is a little bit of the shale there.
Yeah. I suppose you could look on this side.
Yeah, it has a shininess to it, and also it's very light as well.
It is very light.
If you compare that with a bit that's beach washed, water rolled.
Wow, look at that.
Because it's very light and it's never cold. It's always slightly warm.
Yeah.
And there's been suggestions that this is why it was first used to make jewellery in the Bronze Age. But you see a lot of it in Roman jewellery as well. And then it sort of trails away in popularity, and then it's really, really popular in the first 3/4 of the 19th century.
19th century. Yeah, the Victorians
Massively
loved
popular.
their jet,
Absolutely,
didn't they?
yeah. And huge amounts of it were mined.
Jet transformed the fortunes of the small whaling port of Whitby. At its height, in the mid to late 1800s, the jet industry here was exporting to Europe and America and employing upwards of 1,500 people. No longer just a fishing harbour, the Victorians flocked to Whitby and popularised the world's new souvenir. While Charlotte has been admiring Victorian enterprise, Oliver is following up on the military base at Kilnsey. The arrival of 1,000 soldiers obviously changed the life of the tiny farming village, which had 69 people living in it, half of whom were under 16. Oliver is joining Kilnsey resident Jan Crowther, who's discovered a diary kept by a local lad, Ernie Norwood. He remembered how rapidly the soldiers took over the village.
August the 4th, 1914, our headmaster told us that war had been declared and we were sent home from school. At noon that same day, a contingent of the East Yorks marched into Kilnsea. At 3 o'clock, 3 batteries of the field artillery galloped into Kilnsea. As if that were not enough excitement, at midnight, a company of Northumberlands marched in. Kilnsea was a garrison town in less than 12 hours. I mean, it's a huge change for the people to deal with, and I suppose in some senses it's going to have maybe positive and maybe negative effects on village life. I mean, Ernie mentions about seeing a motor car for the first time and having a ride in that, and the exposure for them to this new and exciting world must have been really fantastic.
Yeah. And then a railway line was built from Kilnsea to Sperm, and so that must have been tremendously exciting for them as well.
But there must have been some sense of fear that, you know, the battery's been built for a reason and that might be a place where invasion could take place.
Well, it would certainly bring that very much to the forefront of their minds, wouldn't it? Not only that, but they did actually, when they were moving about their own village, they actually had barriers in the road and they had to carry permits. And I would not think that would have gone down terribly well.
It's a lot of new men in the area. I mean, did that have an effect socially on what was happening with marriages and relationships?
I'm quite sure it did. I mean, for a start, there would have been social events and obviously girls would be very welcome to attend them. Whether their fathers would be quite so happy about this, I mean, I really don't know.
Ernie's sister actually ended up marrying a soldier, is that right?
Yes, there's a story in there about his sister being escorted back from some function.
One day, after the officer in charge said, "You walk home every night, don't you? In future, you'll have an NCO to escort you." He volunteered to do it every night, and they were eventually married. But how long did it last for? How long did that change take part in the community?
At the end of the war, the military did not leave. They stayed at Godwin Battery until, obviously, Second World War comes along and the whole thing gets all started all over again. Kilnsea never really became anything but a garrison town right the way through until the 50s, really.
I'm back on the trail of alum production here, that colourless salt used to fix dyes in the textile industry.
One of the problems we have with understanding how alum production worked is that so much of the archaeology has been damaged by erosion. Fortunately for us, there are some remains along this coast that have escaped the ravages of the sea.
I'm joining Gus at Ravenscar, south of Robin Hood's Bay, at the remains of Peak Alum Works. We're hoping this site will help us understand the different stages of alum production that would have taken place at Saltic Bay. But I have to say, at first glance, it looks different.
Welcome to Ravenscar. Yes, thank you.
So we've been down at Saltic Bay and seen what was an alum works, and this is a completely different setting.
It does look different from Saltwick, but generally speaking, the key parts of the process come down the hillside in exactly the same way. You start the process by excavating in and obtaining the shale. It is then formed into long mounds of hundreds of tons of material at a time, interleaved with fuel, usually brushwood, and then they set fire to it. These mounds would have been up there and you'd seen them smouldering away for the best part of a year. So there is the shale in its original state.
Yep.
And then, after it's been burnt, it goes this characteristic terracotta-y red. What they did once they've done all that burning process and it's gone this orange-red colour, then it's steeped in pits of water so that the aluminium sulphate that we're interested in and other impurities goes into a liquor that can then be brought down the hillside for the next stages in the process.
The rest of the process could take up to another year. This was no fly-by-night operation. The liquid extraction had to be purified and concentrated in order for the crystals to form. At the moment the alum was ready, you could float an egg in the solution. But to reach that stage involved a surprising recipe.
In this room here, they had tanks along this side for a second boiling, a second reduction of the fluid. And the magic ingredient that goes in at this point, the thing that makes the crystals happen is urine.
How much urine?
Lots of urine, barrel loads of urine, concentrated, matured urine, because the chemistry that they're after is about ammonia.
What does this place smell like?
It must have smelt revolting, and it's hot, hot, hot. You've got these big open pans evaporating, reducing the fluids in here. It wasn't a pleasant place to work.
After over 200 years, the factory at Ravenscar ceased operations. Alum works like these, scattered along the Yorkshire coast, had exported to Venice, Amsterdam and St. Petersburg. But in the 1870s, new dye fixatives pushed the industry here out of business. Not all alum works survived for as long as Ravenscar. Later we'll try to find out whether the works here at Saltic Bay stayed the course. On the other side of Saltic Bay is the Van Tromp. We're trying to establish what happened to the other 4 fishermen after the lifeboat had saved skipper Frank Tarl. I'm returning to the wreck with another survivor. Alan Marston was asleep as the boat hit the rocks at Black Nab. He struggled to the wheelhouse to join the others. Very soon they were flooded, and it was clear they'd have to take their chances in the water.
Young Tony, he went first, then George Eves, he went after him. So I went out and I just got this part of my body out at window, and I looked up and this thing coming up there. I thought, you're going to have to go with this one. And she took it and I finished up right inside here somewhere, this side of Black Nab. And I could see the boat, but there's no way could I got back to it.
What did you do then when you were out in the water?
I learnt to swim quick. And I saw these 7 or 8 fellas all come out.
So, like, what were they sort of a human chain? Were they attached to each other, holding onto a rope? Or,
no, onto themselves.
Onto each other. So, what, like this to this, and then they grabbed hold of you and pulled you through? Were they deep in the surf?
Yeah.
What was the boat like?
Van Tromp? Yeah. She was a beautiful ship. Any other boat in Scarborough would have all been lost, honestly. Because there isn't a boat in there that would have stood what she did. She took a horrific, terrible pounding that night.
Alan was pulled ashore along with young Tony Nicholson. Skipper Frank Tarl was safe too. But then the sad news came in. The body of George Eves had been recovered, and that John Addison had drowned in the wheelhouse. Of the crew of 5, only 3 had survived. A couple of miles away, Charlotte is in Whitby again, investigating the Victorians' love affair with Jet. She's keen to find out what triggered the sudden surge of interest. She's arranged to meet Rebecca Tucker, a jeweller and restorer with W. Hammond, one of the town's oldest jet retailers.
So, why was it so popular in the 19th century? What happened suddenly?
One of the reasons is tourism, and the Victorians almost invented the idea of an annual holiday. And of course, the Victorians loved a souvenir to take back as well.
Right, yeah. So we've got some examples of the souvenirs over here.
We do, yeah. So if you're a traveller on a budget, you may just want to buy a simple brooch, which would have an engraving of Whitby Abbey on it, or just the word Whitby itself. You could also get novelty items like a pencil holder, again engraved with Whitby.
Yes.
You could get something like this, which is a smoking pipe.
Oh, wow.
And you can see the carving on top, full of grapes and flowers and fruits and foliage, all carved into that, all done by hand. The techniques of working jet haven't changed greatly. We still hand polish everything ourselves on polishing wheels. We still carve the jet using the grinding wheels. The difference really is in the style.
And of course, we can't talk about Whitby Jet and the Victorians without referencing somewhere along the line the kind of mourning attire and their famous kind of mourning wear, which is what this is an example of here.
Yeah, Queen Victoria and Albert were great patrons of British craftsmanship and industry. But when Prince Albert did die quite suddenly in 1861, Victoria plunged herself into the deepest mourning. She actually chose Whitby Jet as her gemstone of choice to represent her feelings of loss at that time.
So then suddenly everybody took on these kind of mourning rituals, didn't they?
Everyone wanted to appear more associated with aristocracy, so they all wore jet to look like Victoria.
Because you've got some pictures in here, haven't you, of some Victorian ladies.
And we can just see the styles and some of the ways that they used to wear the jewellery. We've got children, and even on this picture here, we have two maids, and even they're wearing the jet jewellery. Yeah. And as you can see, not all of these ladies are actually in mourning. It was actually something that you could get, you know, for your sweetheart as well.
Oh, right.
It was a gemstone of fashion. It is a local gemstone, an organic gemstone. It's very, very rare, and it's got this fascinating history to go with it. So we need to give it back the glamour that it once had and that it deserves.
Whitby jet flourished for 3/4 of the 19th century, a symbol both of the new industry of tourism and, ironically, of Queen Victoria's grief. Today, it's no longer mined, but the amount that actually falls out of the cliffs continues to keep the jet market buoyant. We're continuing our investigation of the fishing trawler, the Admiral Van Trump. We know now that only 3 of the crew survived, but the reason for the accident remains a mystery. Skipper Frank Tarl and the other 2 surviving crewmen had to give evidence to an inquest. Did any of them discover what had gone wrong after they hit Black Nab in the middle of the night?
Right, this is the statement of Frank Tarl himself. And if anyone has got the answers...
It should be Frank.
It should be Frank. So I was awoken at 3 a.m, so we're getting into the events of the evening. I went straight into the wheelhouse, but could see nothing but thick fog. John Addison was standing in the wheelhouse, gripping tight to the chart table. I said to him, "What the hell are we doing here? We are ashore." He never replied, but just stared at me. I had to force my way past him to get to the radio. He seemed petrified with fear or shock.
So he's frozen up?
He's frozen up.
And here, there's another little statement here. I had to put John Addison's life jacket on as he was not able to. So even with the threat to his life, he's not able to act for himself.
They're in the wheelhouse, and they've suddenly got water up to their chest. The water's coming in. I told John Addison to go out of the wheelhouse, as I was afraid that she was going to turn turtle. I guess that means capsize, yeah. He would not go out, and I could not get him out. He's still frozen.
I think this last paragraph is kind of unfortunate. It sums it up. I can give no explanation as to how this shipwreck came about. There had been no drinking on the boat, and John Addison was an experienced seaman who had been at sea all his life.
For some reason, they came wildly off course and ended up ashore.
It just seems like it's going to remain a mystery.
It is a mystery, isn't it? There is no answer. The only person who knows what happened on that night was John Addison, and he never made it off the boat.
The inquest concluded that any precise explanation for the fate of the Van Trump was lost at sea, with the boat and John Addison. We know that something happened to put Addison into such a state of shock that he couldn't even save himself. What we can never know is what caused the boat to veer so dramatically off course. That night had been traumatic. How did the survivors live with their memories? I'm joining Cassie Tarl, daughter of Skipper Frank, who died in 2012. Although the boat was Frank's pride and joy, he said very little about it to his children. But he had souvenirs and vivid memories of the night he very nearly died.
This is an actual scrapbook of everything towards the Admiral Van Trump. I think this is where my dad reflected on what really happened. He was quite a quiet
solitary man. He kept his feelings to himself, but I think this is how he dealt with it.
Yeah.
These are some of the pictures that were taken by the local newspapers, and that was a few days after. And these are some of the pictures that he actually took himself when he went back to retrieve a few items.
Was the ship itself part of your sort of family story? Did he talk about it quite a bit?
No, he never really... We were aware of it, but he always used to just talk about the actual rescue and how he got away.
What did he tell you?
What I know is he got swept out of the boat and he was in the sea, and he was it for about 3 or 4 hours? And then he had to hold on to Black Nab for a couple of hours. He always said to me that he was so tired that he didn't think he'd be able to hold on for much longer. Even he was preparing himself to actually let go. But luckily he did get away, and the lifeboat people saved him.
And have you ever visited Black Nab?
Yes, we went after my father passed away, because my dad, half of his ashes are at Black Nab. He was scattered there. So that's where me and my brother go. That's our place. It's our place now where we remember our father, and we're proud of our father, and we've got something there to remember him by. We have a place.
Although the exact reason why the Admiral Van Trump ran aground remains a mystery, the wreck of the boat, visible only at low tide, is a poignant memorial to a local tragedy that is remembered on this coast even today. The other story we have been investigating in Saltic Bay is the alum works that last dominated the foreshore here in the 18th century. Alum production was a lengthy and complicated business. Like the oil industry today, alum required huge investment over a long period before there was any return. Many alum works either didn't last long or were as often closed as working. Everyone involved was taking an exceptionally big financial risk, but the investors in Saltic were optimistic. I'm joining local historian Peter Appleton to find out whether they made a go of it.
The beginning of the story, as told in these documents, is this one, a deed of co-partnership between the 4 proprietors, and it's dated 24th July 1756.
So who's this between then, this co-partnership agreement?
It's between John Cookson, Ralph Carr, Richard Ellison and Jonas Brown of Whitby. The collective of 4 had leased the alum works from the landowner, Nathaniel Chumley.
And how long is this lease going for?
The lease with Chumley was for 63 years. They're going to have to pay £200 a year, guaranteed rent. But typically some of the other works of the area, they were making profits of £1,000, £1,500, £2,000 a year. So one has to assume that at its heyday, Saltic would have been doing something similar. But it didn't last.
Right.
And we get reference to that in one of these letters. This is a letter from Jonas Brown to Richard Ellison. The profits on making the alum that year, the year in question being 1780, was from £200 to £300, which is only just going to cover the rent that they're paying to Chumley.
That's not good.
So what we then tend to see in these letters, they're starting to talk about how can we get this business off our hands.
So this letter is from 1781.
And this is from Ellison. So he's the one that's expressing his concerns to take the most prudent steps we can to get quit of a bad bargain. He realises that the writing's on the wall and he wants out.
I bet.
This is the year ending 31st December 1784. The works has made a loss of £128. A year later, ending 31st of December 1785, we are talking about a loss of £1,360 for that year.
Over £1,000 in the red. Oof. So what's your feeling about the end of the alum works at Saltic Bay?
I don't think they ever had a chance of turning it round again, because by the time we get to the very late 18th century, the other big coastal works, those have really got themselves sorted out. They have employed scientists from London as consultants to help them understand the chemistry of the process, and they're moving off in a much more scientific way. And I don't think the four merchants and financiers here had that background to actually do something similar at Saltic.
In the mid-1700s, the owners of these alum works thought they could make a fortune. In the spirit of the age, they invested heavily and gambled on huge returns. Their success was brief, and they soon discovered that the science of alum production was moving fast and they'd failed to keep up with it. My time on this coastline has revealed stories of heroism, dedication and courage. The archaeology we've found at low tide has shown us a community full of initiative and enterprise, and ready to take enormous risks, physical and financial. The industries that have developed along this coast may have gone through periods of success and failure, but they have made their mark, not just on Britain, but on the world. These were people determined to achieve, sometimes with the help of the sea, and sometimes in spite of it.